Hey everyone, it's Matt, and today I will be talking to you about all of the video games I played in 2022. At least the video games that I played for more than a few brief moments, as there were some that I tried and couldn't really get into and all that, so these are the video games that I played a substantial amount of time in 2022, but you get the idea. I think that's enough of an introduction, so how about we just jump right into it? So the first video game I played in 2022 was Resident Evil 3. And this was the recent remake of the old Resident Evil 3, which I have not played before. And I have to say, this game was okay. I did not like it nearly as much as Resident Evil 2's remake. It felt a little too short and simple, and it felt kind of like I was just pushing a direction on the stick to make a bunch of action scenes happen